This podcast series is part of the mission of the New York Intellectual Property Law Association, NYIPLA, Past Presidents Committee, to preserve a snippet of the history of our association through the eyes of our past presidents, and to provide continuity for our century-old association's values and traditions for future NYIPLA leaders. I'm Rob Rando, the current president of NYIPLA for the 2023-2024 term. Today, we are pleased to have with us Walter Hanley Jr. He was the 94th president of the NYIPLA during the 2016-2017 term. Walt, welcome. Before we get into any questions, is there anything you'd like to share with us?
Nothing off the top of my head. I noticed you've got a couple guitars in the background, and reminds me that I have to, that's one of my hobbies as well, that I should be turning to that sometime today.
Great. That's great. Love to hear that. All right. Well, Walt, can you please tell us a little about who you are and where you are in your career and life today?
Okay. Well, in terms of where I am, I'm retired from the practice of law. I retired at the end of 2017, and I live in New Jersey with my lovely wife, Patty. I have two daughters who, fortunately, they live close by. They live in Hoboken. I get to see them fairly often. And basically, aside from, I guess I've continued involvement in NYIPLA as an officer of the NYIPLEF, the Education Foundation, which you know about since you attended our last fundraiser in December.
Yep.
So that leaves me with a connection, still to the association, which I value greatly. But aside from that, I have time to pursue my hobbies. Like I said, I play guitar like you do, and golf, play tennis, read. I also have, my wife and I own, in addition to our house in northern Jersey, we have a second home in Cape May. So I spend a lot of time down there as well.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So when did you first become aware of NYIPLA?
It was basically when I started as an associate at Kenyon in 1976. As you know, Kenyon has been a big name in NYPLA. With many Kenyon partners have been presidents, and in fact, the founder was Houston Kenyon back in 1922. So I knew about it right away, and attended my first judges dinner in 1977 as a first-year associate.
Yep. And so when did you first become involved with the association?
Well, that was actually later. My partner, Paul Heller, was president, and he set about on a mission to get everybody, partners especially, to be members. And so I joined around the late 80s when he was president, and at that time I was pretty active in the ABA patent section, because one of my mentors at the firm was very active in that association. So I was doing committee work for ABA, and was not really very active in NYIPLA, at least initially.
And so what inspired you to join the NYIPLA?
Well, Paul's goading, for one thing, but also, one problem with ABA was meetings were on telephone calls. We didn't have Zoom back then, and you had to travel if you wanted to get together with people. So NYPLA was much more logical, place to reside if you were looking for the fellowship and camaraderie, outside of your law firm.
Sure. And certainly camaraderie and collegiality is paramount in the NYIPLA.
Yeah, I agree.
So what activities or roles that you engage in early on when you became a member?
So at some point, I joined the ADR committee, which I guess doesn't exist now, but there was an ADR committee, and Tom Creel, who was an ex-Kenyon partner by then, he was the chair. So I joined that. It was a great committee. It was a small committee. We had great meetings, and ultimately I became chair of that committee. I think that was mid 2000s, and so I was chair of that committee for 3 years. And I think it was Anthony Giaccio, who was then my partner. I think he was then the immediate past president. He then promoted me to be a board member. And so coming off that committee chairship, I think I was on the patent litigation committee for a while too. And then Anthony pinged me, and fortunately, I was able to join the board. That was around 2010, I think.
Okay, well, you may be happy to learn that reestablished the Arbitration Mediation Committee.
Good.
And Tom Creel is one of the co-chairs, along with PJ Murphy and Judge Brown, retired Judge Brown.
Yeah, Judge Brown is he's a great mentor for that activity.
Absolutely. So did there come a time when you decided that you wanted to assume a leadership role, or did it just evolve over time?
Well, I did want to be the chair of the ADR committee. And then I think it was just good fortune that Anthony saw fit to get me involved, more involved by joining the board. And I really enjoyed board membership. I mean, it was an opportunity to get together with people who really committed to the association, and to sort of be a guiding force, and which I enjoyed quite a bit.
Sure. So let's talk about your time as president. What was the trajectory in the association that led you to become the president?
Well, the association then was I think was pretty much on an upward trajectory in terms of membership, or at least stable in terms of membership. And I recall that there had just prior to my joining the board, there had been some issue relating to association's funds, which I think had been worked out. So that it was, I think the association was in a pretty good place then. The thing that sort of didn't upset the apple cart, but was a huge worry for me from the moment I became president, even before, was the fact that the judges' dinner venue became an issue. Before I became president, the Waldorf announced that it was going to shut down for a time and renovate. So one of the very first things that I had to address with the board was, what do we do? And we had the choice of either moving the date to sometime before the end of February. So, we had issues with weather in March. We were going to, deal with that concern about snowstorms and so on by moving it to February, or we could change the venue. And so the very first board meeting, this came up, and I was surprised that, well, I guess initially surprised that there wasn't more impetus toward moving the date. And then I quickly realized that, because the Waldorf was shutting down, it was going to be shut down for several years, somebody was going to be a guinea pig. Some president was going to be a guinea pig, and the board was okay with me being the guinea pig. So we went with moving the venue. I worked with Feike Van Ryn, who was absolutely fantastic, as you know.
Absolutely.
And finding another venue, we decided on the New York Hilton. The board approved it, and we were sort of off and running. But for the entire time period up until the event actually occurred, it was a source of major concern on my part.
Absolutely, I remember it well.
Yes, you were the treasurer.
That's right.
Yes, right.
Yeah. So, can you give us a general overview of what the intellectual property landscape and patent landscape was in terms of the issues confronting the IP community during the time that you were president?
Yeah, and some of this probably still is the case, some of this probably not, but the NPE, or troll, to use a pejorative term, litigation issue was still at the forefront. I remember just after my term, the Supreme Court decided the T.C. Heartland case, which basically changed the venue rule back to what it was, essentially back to what it was in the early part of my career, where, in order to sue a defendant for patent infringement, they had to commit acts of infringement or where they resided. In residence, the Supreme Court interpreted the requirement of residence under the patent statute to be state of incorporation. Before that, for some number of years, residence was equated with, anywhere you could get jurisdiction, which is what had given rise to the, Eastern District of Texas having 35% of the patent cases. So that was still an issue when I became president. It got resolved just after that, in terms of, of the venue issue. Another big issue is AIA was still young and still pretty new. The IPRs was still pretty new. The Patent Office, the Federal Circuit, were still working out interpretation of the AIA's provisions, scope of judicial review. So that was a major issue. And I think a third thing was Section 101. Supreme Court had decided the Mayo case and the Alice case not too long before I became president. So there was sort of a great deal of confusion about the interpretation of Section 101 and concern about technologies, biotechnologies and information technologies not being covered. And the district courts were working out ways of approaching Section 101 issues. So that was also a big issue.
Yeah, it was a loaded plate during that period. And
Yes, yeah.
And I will tell you, your summary of T.C. Hartland was spot on. So I think I might just steal that clip when I have to talk to junior associates about T.C. Hartland.
Yeah. Well, you can take them down memory lane, because you were practicing when at the same time I was, in the time period where venue was anywhere you get personal jurisdiction. And
That's right.
yeah.
Now you always have to put a little more thought into it, like in the beginning.
Right. You've got to find a stronger connection to the Eastern District of Texas.
Or, if you want to stay in New York.
Right.
So you don't have to travel that much. So can you provide a general overview of the various tasks and responsibilities that you were charged with during your term as president?
Yeah, I think as you know, it's basically, your job is to oversee all the activities, which means getting involved with the committee chairs very much in the board. And the other aspect of it is basically you're the head cheerleader for the association, both inside and outside. Every little speech you give, in part, is a pep talk about the association. Every column you write for the review, your president's corner column is a pep talk about the association, what the committees are doing. So that's an important job. I hope I'm not making it sound trivial, but I view it as being the head cheerleader is an important part of the job.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't think it trivializes it at all, because, you represent really, the lifeblood of the organization while you're occupying the presidency.
Right.
So did you have any specific goals or a mission that you wanted to accomplish during your time as president? And if so, what was it, or what was it?
Yeah, as I remember, not long before that, I was involved in working on a strategic plan for the association. This happened when I was a board member, and I think I actually drafted the first strategic plan. So coming in as president, I was basically working off that. And as I remember, some of the priorities that had been set, and they all relate to growth, of course, were increasing membership among young lawyers. And so we wanted a very active young lawyers committee, and increasing the sort of geographic scope. And so we were looking to stage, to the extent we could, CLE events and other events, outside of Manhattan. So I remember we had a couple of things in New Jersey when I was president, as part of that. And we wanted to, you always want to increase the membership among in-house counsel, because having in-house counsel, with priorities being the way they are in law firms with marketing, if you can, if people can couch membership at NYAPLA in part as a marketing activity, then you get more support from law firms. And so having a very active corporate council membership was another priority.
Yep. So from your perspective, what was your greatest accomplishment or proudest moment during your time as president?
I think it was, and I can't take the credit for this, but I think it was pulling off the successful judges' dinner. As I said, it was a huge worry that I had, even though FICA did incredibly great work in getting it done. And so we ended up, I think, with somewhat of a lower attendance than the last year in the Waldorf, but not too bad. I think it's like 2,500 maybe as compared with around 3,000 the prior year. So, my worst fears were not realized. I thought it went very well. And I was very happy with my choice of the speaker, Walter Isaacson.
Yep.
He was dead on relevant to our activity. He had written his book about Steve Jobs, which is about innovation. He had written a book about the innovators, basically, of the digital age. And just before, I think, he had done the speaking. And so his perspectives on innovation and about the role of IP were directly relevant to the audience. And also picking Judge Denny Chin as the OPS award recipient. Yeah. It kind of fell on my lap, basically, because when I was installed as president at the annual meeting, I think it was 2016, Denny Chin was the keynote speaker. And so I was able to sort of ping him, not right after that, because I wanted to think about it a little bit, but I pretty much 80% thought he should be the one. And so he was a marvelous choice. And yeah, I'm glad that worked out the way it did.
Yeah. No, now that I look back and you remind me, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
That Judge Chin and Walter Isaacson, that was a great combination.
Yeah. Another thing that I think was, didn't end up getting resolved, but was end up being a major effort, at least among some of the officer group, was whether and how to propose amending Section 101. And the way it evolved was we had a very active legislative action committee that Dorothy, my predecessor, Dorothy Auth, was chairing. And we came into the year with a focus on a larger patent reform effort. There have been several bills that had been kicking around amongst committees in Congress relating to patent reform, specifically litigation reform. The venue issue is still a big issue, and the issue of fee awards, moving toward a loser pays kind of possibility, all directed. People were sort of had television about the troll problem, I should say, the NPE issue at that time. So we early on had a forum where the officers, the LAC committee chairs, met with Hakeem Jeffries, who was not then the majority leader of the leader of the Democrats in the House, but he was a very prominent legislator in the House. And since I think part of our jurisdiction encompasses his district, he was a natural for us to try to engage on patent reform. So we had that, and we were. This is pre-election, pre-November 2016. Then the election happened. Became evident that the new administration was not much interested in IP litigation reform, patent reform in general. So we then turned the attention to the Section 101 issue, and we had a lot of activity during my presidency on that. I remember Dorothy Oth went out and spoke at a U.S. PTO roundtable in California on Section 101 reform. Peter Thurlow, who was one of the vice presidents, he spoke at U.S. PTO roundtable in Virginia. We ended up having a president's forum in March 2017, just before the judges' dinner, where Dave Kapos, who was ex-PTO director, was a co-chair with Dorothy, and we invited the representatives of all the major IP associations. We had IPO, AIPLA, Bio. We had what am I missing? ABA patent section, and we had this discussion of amending Section 101, and those other associations were already working on draft provisions. We had been kicking around some language, but weren't ready yet to propose anything. And so that continued up until the end of my term. And then Ann Hassett, who followed me, one of her first acts was to appoint an ad hoc committee, which I think you were a member of.
Yes.
To study the issue with the endpoint of coming up with an actual draft that we could present to the board. Now, flash forward for a year after that, I'm not sure whether we ever presented it. I remember we had some language that the ABA, the AIPLA and IPO had jointly agreed on, and the effort continued up until the time when my time on the board ended. And I frankly don't know whatever happened, whether we ended up with a proposal for the board to adopt or not. But it was the hot thing, at least in terms of board activity and officer activity when I was president.
Yeah, you reminded me there was a lot of activity with the Legislative Action Committee
Right.
during your term. You've identified your proudest moment or greatest accomplishment, but is there any particular memory that you would consider your fondest memory as president?
I think it was the judges' dinner. It was sort of like that feeling of relief when it was happening. It went by in a flash, and you're going to see this is true. But when it all came together at the new place, it was sort of a massive weight was lifted off my shoulders, and that's I shouldn't it's an event where you have your family there, you have close friends. Everybody in the association, all the judges. It's a great deal of fun, and so I think for me certainly that was the highlight. I suspect for most presidents that's also true.
Yeah, I'm finding that as I go through these. So what advice can you give a younger or newer member of NYIPLA if they aspire to assume a leadership role or even perhaps become president of the NYIPLA one day?
Well, get active in a committee. I mean, that's the first step. Get on a committee, and if you are active and you do work, you get noticed because you know, everybody's busy, and anybody who actually participates and produces and, you know, organizes an activity of a committee is going to get noticed, and then probably ends up being a committee chair. You know, you got to sort of stew around a little bit before you get noticed. But you do, and every year, and this is, I'm sure this is the case with you. I know this is the case with me. The first thing you do, even before you're president, is you sit down with FICA and you go over the committee chairs and whether or not there should be any changes. And, you know, some of that can be very politically dicey, but, you know, people who have been active get noticed at that point, and, you know, can be, there's slots that open up. Our committee chairs roll over every 3 years. And so, you know, there's always an open slot for somebody who's been out there and been active. So that's kind of the way to do it. Once you're a committee chair and you're attending those meetings of the chairs and the board, you know, you're probably going to be noticed and be considered for a board position at some point.
Yeah, well,
But it's visibility and relationship building within the association.
yeah, no, that's great advice. So what other advice can you give these younger or newer members to get the most benefit from their membership in NYIPLA?
Yeah, I mean, go to events. You know, I view, and I know I've had this conversation with you in the past. It's FaceTime with other people in the profession in New York or in the New York area who are not your partners, that you get a lot of personal satisfaction out of. I mean, it's not just picking people's brains for tips and best practices and things like that. It's just relationships and enjoying the company of others who have the same concerns you do, have the same pressures you do, have the same you know, interests you do, the same focus you do, same passions you do. And yeah, just you know, get involved and go to stuff. And it makes a big difference between, you know, just being a member and attending the judges' dinner maybe, and, you know, getting the real benefit out of it, which is all that collegiality.
Yep, totally agree. So as we wrap up this interview, Walt, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I one thing I reminded myself before we do this is to acknowledge all the support that I got, and of course you have to start with Feike Van Ryn. I mean, her role is irreplaceable. She's terrific, and you know, the other people who were on the board and in the officer group. The Dorothy who preceded me was absolutely terrific. I hope, and Anna Hassett, who succeeded me, I hope I was as good a president-elect to Dorothy as Ann was to me. I mean, she was, you know, very helpful, as well as you and Peter and all the other board members. You know, I just couldn't thank you enough. It's a very busy year. I just, on a personal note, you know, when I became president, in addition to having my litigation practice to look after, everybody has a, you know, day job. At the time, Kenyon was rapidly shrinking, and we were heading toward a merger. And now I was on the management committee, and that was a major distraction. So the fact that there's all this support around you just makes all the difference.
Oh, that's terrific. Well, I'll tell you, Walt, I've truly enjoyed our conversation here today,
Same here.
And I really appreciate your willingness to share this with us.
Anytime.
I appreciate it, and as you know, the newly formed Past Presidents Committee, you're an automatic member. So, you know, if you got some time you want to take away from your hobbies, let us know.
Absolutely. I know we're going to meet before our little dinner coming up in February, which is fun. And I don't, how are you on the potential for a golf outing?
We're still working on it. I'm
Right.
really determined to try to get it done. You know, there are some hurdles,
Yeah,
just to make sure we get the minimum golfers that we need.
right.
And then the issue of cost and so forth. But I'm really trying. Uh, my thought is now I'm thinking that maybe we do a co-sponsorship with, you know, from the financial perspective, do a co-sponsorship with someone to provide funding. And I'm also, on a personal note, I have a keen interest in autism. My 9-year-old grandson is nonverbal autistic.
I
So
see.
I'm going to propose to the board to make it a charity golf outing for autism. So,
Excellent,
and I'm told that, you know, when it's a charity outing, usually we'll get more buy-in.
excellent idea. Excellent, Rob. Well, keep up the good work. I
Thank
know
you.
you're busy.
All right. Well, thank you. And hopefully I'll see you on February 15th.
Yes, will do. See you
All
then.
right. Thanks a lot. Paul.